My name is Riley, 32 years old, and my family has a bizarre tradition. The women in our bloodline do not go to college. They are expected to stay home, marry young, and serve their husbands. My grandmother did it. My mother did it. When I received my acceptance letter to MIT 13 years ago, my mother tore it in half right in front of my face. She told me that higher education was a waste of time for a girl and that I needed to know my place. I taped that letter back together, packed my bags at 4 in the morning, and walked out the door. I built an empire from scratch. Now, 13 years later, I stood in my sister's living room and watched my mother try to destroy my niece's future the exact same way. But this time I came armed with a financial weapon they never saw coming. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to hold you back from your true potential. The music was blaring so loudly, it rattled the cheap picture frames on the living room walls. It was my niece Sydney's sweet 16 birthday party. The atmosphere in the cramped suburban house was loud, chaotic, and reeked of stale beer and frosted cake. Streamers hung lazily from the ceiling fan, and a massive pile of hastily wrapped gifts sat on the dining table. My sister Courtney and her husband Jamal were hosting the party, though I knew for a fact they had maxed out 3 different credit cards just to afford the catering. Jamal, a tall African-American man who always wore flashy clothes he could not actually afford, was busy laughing loudly with his friends in the corner, clutching a plastic cup. Courtney was fussing over her hair in the hallway mirror, completely ignoring the fact that her daughter looked absolutely miserable. Sydney sat on the edge of the worn-out sofa, forcing a polite smile as extended relatives pinched her cheeks and handed her cheap greeting cards. She was a brilliant girl, smart and driven, but she was suffocating in a house that actively punished ambition. I stood near the kitchen island, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching the circus unfold. Suddenly, my mother Barbara clapped her hands together. Her shrill voice cut through the heavy bass of the music. "All right, everyone, quiet down. It is time for the birthday girl to open her present from her grandmother." The room fell silent. People gathered around as Barbara strutted to the center of the living room, holding a large, flat gift box wrapped in shiny silver paper. She had that familiar, arrogant smirk on her face, the same one she wore the day she ripped up my college dreams. Sydney stood up hesitantly and took the box. She carefully peeled back the tape and lifted the lid. I watched my niece's face drop. All the color drained from her cheeks. Her shoulders slumped, and her eyes filled with immediate hot tears. "Go ahead, show everyone what you got," Barbara urged, her voice dripping with condescension. With trembling hands, Sydney pulled the item out of the box. It was a dull gray polyester uniform, a hotel-made uniform. Pinned to the front of it was a crumpled blank employment application for a local budget motel down the highway. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. Barbara cleared her throat and smiled proudly. "In this family, we believe in hard work," Barbara announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You are 16 now, Sydney. That means you are a woman. You do not need to waste your time finishing high school. It is time for you to step up and help your family. You start training on Monday. You will be working full shifts, and your paychecks will go directly to your parents to help them pay off their credit card debt. That is our tradition." I felt my blood run ice cold. My hands gripped the marble countertop so tightly my knuckles turned white. Jamal stepped forward, chuckling as he threw an arm around Courtney. He raised his cup toward Barbara in a toast. "Amen to that, Barbara." Jamal laughed his booming laugh. "School is a scam anyway. College is just for rich snobs who do not know how to hustle. A woman needs to learn how to clean a house and support her family. Honest work never hurt anyone." "Right, Courtney." My sister nodded eagerly, oblivious to her daughter's silent sobbing. Sydney clutched the ugly gray uniform to her chest, looking down at the floor as tears spilled over her eyelashes. I set my glass down on the marble counter. The soft clinking sound was barely audible over the music, but my movement was sharp enough to catch Barbara's eye. I walked past the dining table, ignoring the whispers of my aunts and uncles. I reached Sydney, gently took the gray uniform from her trembling hands, and tossed it onto the nearest chair. I grabbed the job application, tore it down the middle, and let the pieces flutter to the floor. "Are you out of your mind?" Barbara shrieked, her face instantly flushing crimson. I looked at my mother, my expression entirely blank. She is 16 years old. She is not quitting high school to clean motel rooms. She is going to finish her education. "Oh, right, education," Barbara scoffed, throwing her hands in the air and looking around at the guests as if seeking their approval. "Listen to her, everyone. Listen to the genius. You think just because you ran off to that fancy tech school you are suddenly better than us? What exactly has that degree gotten you?" "Huh," Jamal chimed in, leaning against the wall. "Yeah, I hear you just sit at a desk all day typing on computers. Real impressive. You got a husband yet kids, any real accomplishments?" Barbara pointed a manicured finger at me. "You are 32 years old. You are a spinster living alone in some tiny apartment in California. You threw away your family for a piece of paper, and look at you now. You have nothing. No husband to take care of you, no family of your own. You just type on computers for a living. You are a failure." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. My father, Richard, stood near the front door, arms crossed, nodding along with my mother. Courtney smirked, adjusting her cheap necklace. They were all so desperate to pull me down to their level, so eager to validate their own miserable choices by framing me as the tragic outcast. They had no idea. They had no idea that my tiny apartment was actually a 6,000 square foot penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay. They had no idea that the computers I typed on ran the financial algorithms for half the banks in the country. They did not know I was the founder and CEO of a fintech AI company valued at over $800 million. I kept my life private because I knew they would try to drain me dry. But looking at Sydney, watching her dreams being crushed in real time by the same people who tried to crush mine, I knew my silence had to end. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply reached into my Hermes handbag, a bag that cost more than their cars, and pulled out a sleek navy blue leather folder embossed with the Chase Bank logo. I stepped closer to Sydney and placed it gently in her hands. "Open it," I told her softly. Barbara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "What is that? What are you giving her? If that is a check for $100, you can keep it. We need real money to pay off the house." I ignored my mother. I kept my eyes on Sydney. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Open it." Sydney slowly flipped the folder open. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stock paper. It was a certified financial statement from Chase Private Client. She stared at it, her brow furrowing in confusion. "I do not understand," Sydney whispered, her voice shaking. "6 years ago, when I started my company, I set up a 529 college savings plan in your name." I explained, making sure my voice carried across the silent room. "Every time I closed a major deal, I made a deposit. I wanted to make sure that when it was time for you to go to college, no one could tell you no. Not your grandmother, not your parents, no one." Courtney let out a harsh laugh. "A college fund. Seriously, what is in there, a couple $1,000? I told you we need that money now to pay off the credit cards." "Look at the bottom line, Sydney," I said. Sydney's eyes scanned down the page. When she reached the final number, she gasped. She dropped the folder, her hands flying to her mouth. The paper fluttered to the floor, landing face up, right next to the torn pieces of the motel application. Jamal frowned, pushed off the wall, and swaggered over. He snatched the paper off the floor, ready to make another joke. But as he read the number, his jaw went slack. The smug smile vanished from his face, replaced by pure shock. $350,000, Jamal choked out, his voice cracking. The entire room erupted into gasps. Barbara froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Courtney lunged forward, grabbing the paper from Jamal's hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Yes," I said calmly, looking directly at my mother. $350,000, fully funded, earning 7% annual interest. That is enough to pay for tuition, room and board at any Ivy League university in the country. Sydney is not going to work at a budget motel. She is going to Harvard or Yale or wherever she wants to go. And there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. For a long moment, the only sound in the living room was the heavy thumping bass of the stereo. No one moved. The air was thick with a sudden, suffocating greed. I watched the realization wash over my family as their brains scrambled to process the sheer amount of money sitting on the floor in front of them. Jamal was the first to recover. The mocking sneer vanished from his face, replaced instantly by a wide, predatory grin that made my skin crawl. He let out a loud, forced laugh and took a step toward me, throwing his arms open wide. "Riley, my favorite sister-in-law," Jamal said, his voice dripping with fake warmth. "You know I was just playing with you earlier, right? We all know you are smart. But this is incredible. You really stepped up for the family." Courtney suddenly pushed past our mother. Her eyes were fixed on the financial statement like a starving dog looking at a piece of meat. She rushed over to Sydney and wrapped her arms around her daughter's shoulders, squeezing her tight. "Oh my God, Sydney, can you believe how generous your aunt is?" Courtney gushed, her voice pitching up an octave. "This changes everything for us. We can finally breathe. We can pay off the house, get a new car, and clear those credit cards." Sydney stiffened under her mother's touch. She looked at me, panic flashing in her eyes. She knew exactly what they were trying to do. I did not break eye contact with Jamal. "That money is not for your house, Courtney. It is not for a new car. It is a 529 educational savings plan. It can only be used for qualified tuition and college expenses." Jamal waved his hand dismissively, stepping into my personal space. "Come on, Riley. We are all adults here. There are ways around those rules. You just have to transfer the custodian rights over to me and Courtney. We are her legal guardians after all. It only makes sense that we manage her assets." He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, I have been making some major moves in the crypto market lately. If you sign the account over to me, I can put that 350 grand into a high-yield portfolio. I will double it by the time Sydney graduates. She can have her college money, and her parents can finally get out of debt. Everyone wins." I looked at the man who had just told my niece to go scrub toilets to pay his bills. "You are not touching a single cent of this money, Jamal." His smile faltered just for a second. "Excuse me. You heard me. I am the sole account owner and custodian. Sydney is the designated beneficiary. Legally, you have absolutely zero access to this account. If you try to withdraw a dime for your failed crypto scams or your credit card debt, I will have you investigated for wire fraud." The fake charm drained from Jamal's face entirely. His shoulders squared and his hands balled into fists. The mask was gone. "You think you can come into my house, disrespect me in front of my friends, and wave money in my face?" Jamal growled, taking another step forward to intimidate me. "I am her father. I decide what happens to her and her money." My mother, Barbara, quickly stepped behind Jamal, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are out of line, Riley. You owe this family. You owe your sister. If you really have that kind of money, you need to sign it over to Jamal right now. It is the Christian thing to do." "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice cold and steady. I packed up the folder, placed it back into my bag, and turned to Sydney. "Keep studying. Do not let them stop you. Call me if you need anything." Before I could take another step, Jamal blocked my path. His eyes were dark with rage. "You listen to me very carefully," he hissed. "You are going to transfer that account to my name by Monday morning. If you do not, I will call my lawyer. I will file a restraining order against you. I will tell a judge you are unstable and trying to groom my daughter. I will make sure you are legally barred from ever coming within 100 feet of her again. You will never see Sydney until she turns 18. Courtney nodded furiously from the couch. "We will do it, Riley. Do not test us." I looked at the people who shared my blood, willing to tear apart a teenager's life for a quick payout. I adjusted my handbag on my shoulder and walked right past them toward the front door. "Have your lawyer call me," I said without looking back. The drive back to my penthouse was a blur of adrenaline and cold anger. I knew my family was toxic, but their willingness to sabotage Sydney's life for their own gain had reached a new level of depravity. My phone buzzed incessantly in the passenger seat. I ignored it. I needed to strategize. By the time I unlocked the door to my apartment, I had already formulated a plan. I poured myself a glass of water and finally checked my phone. There were 27 missed calls and 54 text messages. Most of them were from Courtney. The rest were from aunts, uncles, and cousins I had not spoken to in years. The smear campaign had begun faster than I anticipated. I sat down at my kitchen island and opened the first message from my Aunt Helen. "How could you be so cruel to your sister? You have all that money and you are hoarding it while she drowns in debt. You always were selfish." The next text was from my cousin Mark. "Heard you went crazy at Sydney's party, trying to buy her affection. You need help, Riley. Stop harassing Courtney and Jamal." I opened Facebook. Courtney had posted a 5-minute video of herself sitting in her car crying without tears. She stared into the camera looking exhausted and victimized. "I did not want to bring this to social media," Courtney sniffled in the video, wiping her dry eyes. "But my sister Riley showed up to my daughter's sweet 16 and caused a massive scene. She has always been jealous of my family. Now she is waving a fake bank statement around trying to manipulate my daughter into leaving us. She is mentally unstable. I am terrified for my child's safety. Please pray for us." The comments were a cesspool of outrage. Dozens of family members and family friends were calling me a monster, a narcissist, and a psycho. They were demanding I give the money to Jamal to prove I was not trying to steal Sydney. It was classic gaslighting. Paint me as the aggressor so they could play the victims and steal the funds. I closed the app feeling a mixture of disgust and satisfaction. They were playing checkers and I was playing chess. Let them post their fake tears. I had financial data. A sharp knock on my front door interrupted my thoughts. I checked the security feed on my tablet. It was a man in a cheap suit clutching a manila envelope. I pressed the intercom button. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Delivery for Riley," the man said, looking directly at the camera. I unlocked the door and pulled it open just wide enough to grab the envelope. The man shoved it toward me, turned on his heel, and walked quickly down the hall. I closed and locked the door, ripping the envelope open. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a cease and desist letter drafted by some low-rent strip mall attorney Jamal must have hired. The letter demanded I immediately transfer the custodianship of the 529 account to Jamal and Courtney, or face civil action for emotional distress and harassment. The second document was a restraining order. I scanned the paper, my eyes narrowing. It was not a court-ordered document. It was a draft filled with fabricated claims of me threatening violence at the party. Attached was a note from Jamal's attorney. "Ms. Riley, my clients are prepared to file this restraining order with the courts on Monday morning. However, they are willing to resolve this matter privately if the 529 funds are transferred into Mr. Jamal's primary bank account by 5 p.m. tomorrow." It was extortion, plain and simple. Jamal was using the threat of a restraining order to try and blackmail me into handing over $350,000. He thought I would be scared. He thought I would crumble under the pressure of losing access to Sydney and the shame of a public court battle. He had wildly miscalculated. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father, Richard. I hesitated for a moment before answering. My father had always been passive, enabling my mother's abuse and Courtney's entitlement. I wondered what script they had given him to read. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice flat. "Riley, please," my father said, his voice cracking. He sounded genuinely distressed. "Please, you have to stop this. You have to give Jamal the money." "I am not giving Jamal the money, Dad. It is for Sydney's education." "You do not understand," he cried, a panicked edge to his voice. "Jamal is in trouble, deep trouble. He owes a lot of money to some very bad people, $200,000. He lost it all in that crypto thing. If he does not pay them back, they are going to take Courtney's house. They might even hurt them." I paused, absorbing this new information. $200,000. No wonder Jamal was so desperate. You are telling me Jamal gambled away 200 grand of money he did not have, and your solution is to let him steal his daughter's college fund to pay off his loan sharks, I asked, disgusted. She is your sister Riley. She is family. You have to save her marriage. Save her marriage? I repeated, my anger finally boiling over. He is a criminal, Dad. He is trying to extort me right now. I just got a fake restraining order from his lawyer demanding I wire the money directly to his bank account. Just do it, my father begged, completely ignoring the extortion. Please, Riley, we need that money. Who is we, Dad? I asked, a sudden suspicion forming in my mind. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear his shaky breathing. Dad? What did Jamal do? I demanded. He needed capital, my father mumbled, sounding defeated. He needed capital for his investments. We wanted to help him. We wanted to help Courtney. Did you give him money? I pressed. We did not have any cash, my father admitted, his voice barely a whisper. So he used the house. My stomach dropped. You let him take out a second mortgage on your house. We did not let him. My father sobbed. He brought us papers. He said it was just a cosigner agreement for a small business loan. We did not read them carefully. The bank called yesterday. Jamal has not made a payment in 3 months. If he does not come up with the money, they are going to foreclose on our house, too. I closed my eyes, pressing 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose. My parents were about to lose their home because they blindly trusted a scam artist over their own daughter. I am sorry, Dad, I said coldly, but I am not bailing him out. I hung up the phone before he could say another word. Jamal was not just a greedy brother-in-law anymore. He was a threat to everyone's financial security. I picked up the fake restraining order and the extortion letter, walked over to my home office, and booted up my computer. It was time to introduce Jamal to my legal team. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to Mitchell, the ruthless lead corporate counsel for my company. He answered on the second ring. I did not bother with pleasantries. I told him I had a personal matter that required immediate, aggressive intervention. Within 20 minutes, Mitchell was sitting across from me at my kitchen island, reviewing the crumpled cease and desist letter and the drafted restraining order. He adjusted his glasses, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "This is amateur hour," Mitchell said, tossing the papers back onto the marble counter. "The lawyer who drafted this operates out of a strip mall next to a laundromat. The extortion attempt alone is enough to have him disbarred. What are your orders?" "I want you to go to my sister's house," I told him. "Take 2 of your best litigators with you. I want you to explain to Jamal exactly what happens when you try to extort a chief executive officer. Do not leave until he understands that if he ever contacts me again, I will personally see to it that he spends the next decade in federal prison." "Consider it done," Mitchell said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. While Mitchell headed out to deliver my message, I moved into my home office and locked the door. It was time to find out exactly what kind of mess my father had co-signed his life away for. I logged into my company's proprietary financial analysis software. It was an advanced artificial intelligence system designed to detect microscopic anomalies in global banking transactions. Usually, we used it to protect multinational banks from cyber threats. Today, I was using it to dissect my brother-in-law. I typed Jamal's full name, his known addresses, and his basic public records into the database and hit execute. The screen went dark for a fraction of a second before exploding into a web of glowing red data points. The AI had bypassed standard credit checks and pulled a comprehensive map of Jamal's digital footprint. I sat back in my leather chair, my eyes scanning the cascading lines of information. It was worse than I thought. Much worse. Jamal had not just lost money in a bad cryptocurrency trade. He had been running a textbook Ponzi scheme. The system flagged dozens of shell companies registered in his name, tracing back to offshore accounts that had recently been completely drained. But the most sickening part was the source of his funds. He was not scamming wealthy investors. He was targeting vulnerable people in his own community. I found records of retirement accounts completely wiped out, and there, buried beneath a pile of fraudulent transfers, was the deed to my parents' house. I pulled up the mortgage documents. My father said they had signed a cosigner agreement for a small business loan. But the document on my screen was a full title transfer and a massive second mortgage. The signatures for my mother and father were perfectly forged. Jamal had stolen their house right out from under them, cashed out the equity, and funneled the money into his failing offshore accounts. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Mitchell calling from the road. "We just left the residence," Mitchell reported, his tone entirely professional but laced with satisfaction. I assure you, Jamal's lawyer practically wet himself when I cited the exact federal extortion statutes he was violating. They have formally withdrawn all demands for the 529 funds and shredded the drafted restraining order. Jamal tried to put up a tough front, but he folded the second I mentioned wire fraud. "Good," I said, my eyes still locked on the red glowing web of Jamal's crimes. "But the situation has escalated, Mitchell. I just ran a full background check. Jamal is running a fraudulent investment ring, and he forged my parents' signatures on a second mortgage. He is in default, and the bank is preparing to foreclose on their home." There was a brief silence on the line. "Do you want me to contact the authorities?" Mitchell asked. "Not yet," I replied, my mind working 10 steps ahead. "If we call the police now, my parents lose their house anyway, and Jamal will find a way to manipulate my sister into taking the fall. I need to gather all the evidence and present it in a way they cannot deny. I need absolute proof." I hung up the phone and began downloading the transaction ledgers to an encrypted drive. Jamal thought he could bully me into submission. He thought because I was a woman who stayed quiet at family gatherings I was weak. But he had just invited a shark into a kiddie pool. I was going to dismantle his entire life piece by piece. Suddenly, my building's concierge buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Riley," the concierge said, sounding slightly panicked, "your parents are here in the lobby. They are demanding to see you, and your mother is causing quite a scene." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Send them up." A few moments later, there was a frantic knocking at my door. I opened it to find Barbara and Richard standing in the hallway. They looked completely out of place in the sleek, modern corridor of my building. My mother's face was flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and she carried an air of frantic desperation. My father stood behind her, looking pale and defeated. Before I could even offer a greeting, Barbara pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes darting around wildly. Her gaze swept over the floor-to-ceiling windows, the custom modern art, and the panoramic view of the bay. I saw the flash of resentment in her eyes. It was the same look she had when she tore up my MIT letter, that deep-seated hatred for my success. "Are you happy now?" Barbara yelled, spinning around to face me. "Are you satisfied with destroying your sister's life?" I calmly closed the door and leaned against it. "I am not the one who took out a fraudulent second mortgage, Mother. Do not you dare speak to me in that tone," she snapped. Stepping closer, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. Jamal was trying to build a business. He was trying to provide for Courtney and Sydney. "It is a loan, Riley. A simple business loan that he fell behind on. And you, with all this?" She gestured wildly at the apartment. "You have the nerve to hoard your money while your own flesh and blood faces the street." I crossed my arms. "It is not a business loan. It is a Ponzi scheme. He forged your signatures. He stole the equity out of the house you worked your entire lives to pay off." Barbara let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Forged? You think he forged our signatures? You are delusional. You have always been delusional. We signed those papers willingly. We knew what we were doing." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "You knew he was taking out a second mortgage. We agreed to help him," my father mumbled from the doorway, not meeting my eyes. "He said it was temporary." I felt a cold realization wash over me. They were lying to protect Jamal. Even now, facing foreclosure and absolute ruin, they were still protecting the golden child and her husband. They would rather go down with Jamal's sinking ship than admit they were wrong to choose Courtney over me all those years ago. "You lied to me on the phone, Dad," I said, my voice hardening. "You told me you did not know what he was doing." "I panicked," he said weakly. "But your mother is right. We signed them. We wanted to help." Barbara stepped right up to me, her face inches from mine. She smelled strongly of cheap perfume and stale coffee. So you can stop playing Detective Riley. Stop making up these crazy stories about Ponzi schemes and fraud. Jamal made a bad investment, that is all. Now you are going to transfer that college fund to him, or you are going to write a check to cover the mortgage. Right now. She pointed a finger directly at my chest, her voice dropping to a menacing hiss. Because if you do not, I will make sure the whole family knows what a selfish, cruel, psychotic person you really are. I will ruin you. I will post it everywhere. I will tell your clients. I will tell the news. I will tell everyone that you are trying to steal my granddaughter and let your own parents go homeless just out of spite. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. There was no love in her eyes. There was no remorse. There was only an endless toxic void of manipulation and entitlement. She was a narcissist pushed to the edge, completely unhinged, and willing to do anything to maintain her delusion of a perfect family. "You cannot ruin me, Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm. "My clients are multi-billion-dollar financial institutions. They do not care about your Facebook posts." "I will jump!" she suddenly shrieked, backing away toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the balcony. "I swear to God, Riley, I will open that door and jump right off this balcony. I will leave a note saying you drove me to it. I will do it. I will kill myself right here, right now, unless you give Jamal the money." She grabbed the handle of the sliding glass door and yanked it open. The wind from the bay whipped into the living room, blowing her hair wildly around her face. My father let out a strangled cry and took a step toward her. "Barbara, stop," he pleaded. I did not move. I did not blink. I just watched her assessing the situation with the same cold logic I used to analyze data. It was a classic manipulation tactic, the ultimate gaslighting maneuver. Threaten self-harm to force compliance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and held it up, showing her the screen. "You see this?" I asked loudly over the sound of the wind. "I am hitting record. Every corner of this apartment is also covered by security cameras. If you jump, I will have it from 3 different angles in ultra-high definition. The police will see exactly what happened. They will see that it was your choice." Barbara froze her hand, gripping the balcony railing. She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and fury. She expected me to crumble, to cry, to beg her to step down. She expected me to hand over everything I had built just to appease her madness. But the little girl who cried over a torn college acceptance letter was dead. The woman standing before her was forged in fire. "Step inside or jump." "Mother," I said, my voice slicing through the wind like a razor. "But know this. I am not giving you or Jamal a single dime. Not now, not ever." Barbara's hand trembled on the glass door. The cold wind whipped her hair, but the icy stare I gave her was far colder. She looked down at the sheer drop to the busy street below, then back up at the security camera blinking with a steady red light in the corner of the ceiling. The realization that her ultimate manipulation tactic had completely failed washed over her face. She let out a frustrated, guttural scream, violently yanking the sliding door shut and stepping back into the living room. "You are dead to me!" Barbara spat, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Do you hear me? I have no daughter." "I know," I replied calmly. "You made that clear 13 years ago when you tore up my future. Now get out of my home before I have my security team escort you out in handcuffs." My father looked at me with tear-filled eyes. He opened his mouth as if to plead one last time, but Barbara grabbed his arm and dragged him toward the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, echoing through the massive penthouse. I stood in the silence for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mind, however, was crystal clear. The toxic umbilical cord was finally severed. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet blur of data analysis. I meticulously compiled every piece of evidence from Jamal's fraudulent accounts, building an airtight dossier of his financial crimes. I went to bed late and woke up early, fueled by a cold determination to protect my niece at all costs. At exactly 9 in the morning, a sharp, aggressive knock echoed through the hallway. I walked over and glanced at the security monitor on my kitchen island. It was not my parents this time. It was a man in a rumpled windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. A courier. I walked to the door and pulled it open. The man did not say a word. He simply shoved the envelope into my chest, turned on his heel, and fast walked down the corridor toward the elevators. I locked the door and walked back to the kitchen, ripping the paper open to see what new game they were playing. Inside was a stack of legal documents stamped with the seal of some obscure law firm I had never heard of. Jamal was relentless, I had to give him that. After my corporate lawyer had terrified his first attorney into quitting, Jamal had apparently scrambled to find another bottom-feeding lawyer, willing to draft garbage demands for a quick buck. The first page was a blaring cease and desist order printed in aggressive, bold font. It accused me of financial manipulation, parental alienation, and severe emotional distress against the legal guardians of Sydney. The second document was even more absurd. It was a forged notice of intent to file criminal charges. According to this poorly drafted piece of fiction, Jamal's new lawyer claimed that withholding the 529 college funds constituted illegal hoarding of minor assets. The letter explicitly demanded that the entire $350,000 balance be wire transferred directly to Jamal's personal checking account by 5 o'clock that evening. If I failed to comply, the letter warned they would immediately contact the local police department and press charges against me for attempted kidnapping and financial abuse. I let out a genuine hard laugh. The audacity was almost impressive. They were using fake legal threats to try and extort a corporate chief executive officer who had a multi-million-dollar legal department on speed dial. The document was littered with grammatical errors and cited penal codes that did not even apply to my state. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to use the fear of police involvement to bully me into submission. Jamal was cornered. His offshore accounts were empty. His loan sharks were circling, and the bank was foreclosing on the house he had stolen from my parents. This bogus legal threat was a Hail Mary pass from a drowning man. He thought that throwing the word police around would make me panic and wire the money to save my professional reputation. He had no idea that I was already 10 steps ahead of him. I picked up my phone and took high-resolution photos of the extortion demands. I emailed them directly to Mitchell, my lead counsel, with a simple subject line: "Add this to the federal pile." Mitchell replied less than 2 minutes later: "Extortion across state lines using fraudulent legal documents. Beautiful. We have enough to bury him under the jail. Do you want me to engage?" I typed my response quickly. "Not yet. Let them think they have the upper hand for a few more hours. I want them to walk into a trap they cannot talk their way out of." My phone vibrated on the marble counter, jarring me from my thoughts. I looked down at the caller ID. It was my father again. The instinct to reject the call was strong, but I needed to know what lie they were spinning now that their extortion attempt had been documented. I hit accept and put the phone on speaker. Riley, my father's voice trembled. He sounded even worse than yesterday, his breathing shallow and erratic. "Riley, you have to listen to me. Please do not hang up. I am listening, Dad. But if you are calling to demand money again, this conversation is over." No, please," he stammered. "I need your help. I do not know what to do. Your mother is inconsolable. She has been crying for hours. Jamal is gone." "Gone?" I asked, my tone sharpening. "What do you mean, gone?" "He left the house this morning," my father explained, his voice cracking. "He told Courtney he was going to a meeting, but he took his passport and cleared out their joint checking account. Courtney is hysterical. She just found a note." My analytical mind immediately went to work. Jamal had realized his fake legal threat wasn't going to work on me. His Ponzi scheme was collapsing. The bank was foreclosing on the house he stole from my parents, and now he was running. "What did the note say?" I demanded. My father sobbed into the phone. "He said he had to leave the country. He said the men he borrowed money from are looking for him. They have been calling the house Riley. They threatened Courtney. They threatened Sydney." The pieces clicked together perfectly. Jamal hadn't just stolen from vulnerable retirees. He had borrowed money from people who didn't use banks to collect their debts. "Dad," I said firmly, "tell me exactly how much he owes these loan sharks." $200,000? My father whimpered. "He took out the second mortgage on our house to try and pay them back, but he lost that money too in some offshore investment. He owes them 200 grand, Riley. If he doesn't pay, they said they would come to the house. He paused, taking a ragged breath. You have to give Courtney the money from that college fund. You have to save her. She is your sister. She is a mother. You cannot let these men hurt her or Sydney. You have more than enough to cover it. Please, Riley. Give them the $350,000. Pay off the debt and let Courtney keep the rest so she can get back on her feet. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My father was practically begging me to sacrifice my niece's entire future, her chance at an Ivy League education, just to bail out a criminal and his enabling wife. Dad, listen to yourself, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You are asking me to take the money I saved for Sydney's education and hand it over to violent loan sharks because your son-in-law is a con artist. You want me to reward Courtney for staying with a man who stole your house and endangered her child. She didn't know Riley, my father cried desperately, defending the golden child. Courtney didn't know what he was doing. She is a victim here. Courtney is an adult, I countered sharply. She chose to ignore every red flag because Jamal bought her designer bags and leased luxury cars they couldn't afford. She is not a victim. She is an accomplice. Riley, I am begging you, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Save your sister's marriage. Save our family. If you don't give her that money, she will lose everything. The bank is taking our house. Jamal is gone. Courtney has nothing. You are the only one who can fix this. I let his words hang in the air for a long moment. He was right about one thing. I was the only one who could fix this. But I wasn't going to fix it by writing a check. I am not giving Courtney the money, Dad. Not a single cent. There was a long, horrifying silence on the other end of the line. You really are a monster, my father whispered, the sadness in his voice suddenly replaced by a cold, bitter edge. Your mother was right. You care more about that money than you do about your own blood. He hung up. I picked up the phone, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. They still didn't get it. They still thought they could manipulate me with guilt and shame. I opened my encrypted drive, staring at the undeniable proof of Jamal's crimes. My father thought Jamal was just running from loan sharks. He had no idea the IRS was about to join the hunt. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. It was time to play my next card. I grabbed my coat, locked my apartment, and headed down to the private garage. I wasn't just going to play defense anymore. Jamal thought he could run. He thought he could abandon his wife and daughter, leave my parents homeless, and escape the consequences of his actions just by getting on a plane. He vastly underestimated the reach of a Silicon Valley tech CEO. As I pulled my car onto the highway, I called Mitchell again. Change of plans. Mitchell, I said, my voice steady. Jamal is running. He packed his passport and drained his accounts this morning. He is trying to flee the country to escape the loan sharks. Mitchell didn't miss a beat. Do you want me to intercept him at the airport? No, I replied. Let him run for now. We need to handle the immediate threat first. Courtney and my parents are still operating under the delusion that this is just a bad business deal. They still think I am the villain for not handing over Sydney's money. I need to shatter that delusion completely. Send the team to my sister's house right now. I gave him the address and ended the call. I drove toward the suburbs, a cold sense of purpose settling over me. By the time I pulled up to Courtney's sprawling, heavily mortgaged suburban house, Mitchell's team had already arrived. 2 sleek black SUVs were parked in the driveway. I walked up to the front door just as Mitchell, flanked by 2 sharp-looking litigators, was pressing the doorbell. Courtney opened the door. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, but the moment she saw me standing behind my lawyers, her sadness instantly turned to pure, unadulterated rage. Get off my property! Courtney screamed, her face contorting. How dare you show your face here? Jamal is gone because of you. If you had just given us the money, he wouldn't have had to run from those men. She tried to slam the door, but one of Mitchell's litigators calmly placed a polished leather shoe in the doorframe, stopping it from closing. Mrs. Courtney Mitchell began, his voice smooth and deadly calm. We are not here to discuss your husband's poor financial choices. We are here to formally respond to the cease and desist and the notice of intent that your legal counsel attempted to serve my client this morning. Courtney blinked confused. She looked at me, then back at Mitchell. What are you talking about? My lawyer sent you a legal order to hand over the trust fund. You have to do it, or you are going to jail. Mitchell let out a short, humorless laugh. He pulled the crumpled documents out of his briefcase and held them up. Your lawyer, if you can even call him that, drafted a fraudulent document? Mitchell explained, his tone laced with professional disdain. Attempting to extort a corporate executive using forged legal threats and the promise of false police reports is a federal crime. We have already contacted the State Bar Association. Your attorney has formally withdrawn his representation of your husband, effective 20 minutes ago, to save his own license. Courtney's jaw dropped. No, that's not true. Jamal said the lawyer was taking care of it. He said we were going to get the money today. Mitchell stepped closer, completely invading her space. Let me be absolutely clear, Mrs. Courtney. If you, your husband, or anyone acting on your behalf ever contacts Ms. Riley regarding that account again, we will file charges for extortion, harassment, and attempted grand larceny. We will drag you into civil court and bankrupt whatever is left of your miserable estate. Do you understand? Courtney shrank back, her arrogance crumbling. She looked at me desperate. Riley, please. Jamal owes $200,000. The men called again. They said they know where Sydney goes to school. Her words hit me like a physical blow. They were threatening my niece. The rage I felt earlier was nothing compared to the absolute fury that ignited in my chest now. Jamal had dragged his own daughter into the crosshairs of violent criminals. I stepped past Mitchell, forcing Courtney to look me in the eye. Where is Sydney? I demanded. She is in her room, Courtney sobbed, covering her face with her hands. She won't come out. She is terrified. Pack her bags, I ordered. Courtney looked up alarmed. What? No! You can't take her? She is my daughter. You cannot protect her, Courtney, I said coldly. Your husband stole your parents' house, drained your bank accounts, and fled the country, leaving you and your child to deal with his violent debt collectors. If you care about Sydney at all, you will let me take her somewhere safe right now. Courtney hesitated. I could see the battle raging in her eyes. The maternal instinct to protect her child was fighting against her deeply ingrained pride and her desperate need to pretend her life wasn't falling apart. Before she could answer, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an automated alert from my company's AI system. I pulled it out and read the notification. My blood ran cold. The situation had just escalated from dangerous to catastrophic. Jamal wasn't just running from the loan sharks. He had just made a move that would destroy everything. I stared at the glowing screen of my mobile phone, my breath catching in my throat. The artificial intelligence system I designed was built to trace complex financial webs in real time. It had just pinged with a massive catastrophic update regarding my parents' financial profiles. Jamal had not just packed a bag and bought a plane ticket to flee the loan sharks. He had spent the last 48 hours executing a scorched earth exit strategy. When my parents stood in my penthouse and claimed they willingly signed a loan to protect him, I knew they were lying. My system just uncovered the true depth of Jamal's betrayal. He had not just forged their signatures on a second mortgage. He used that forged document to establish a fraudulent power of attorney. 3 minutes ago, Jamal used it to liquidate their entire retirement portfolio. Every single penny of my father's pension, every dime of my mother's 401k. It was all gone, wired through a cryptocurrency mixer, and vanished into a decentralized offshore ledger. I looked up from my phone. Courtney was still standing in the doorway, her face pale, waiting for me to say something. Mitchell and his team stood by, silently awaiting my instructions. Mitchell, I said, my voice dangerously low, I need you to stay here. Do not let Courtney leave this house. If those loan sharks show up, you handle them. I am going to get Sydney, and then I have to make a phone call that is going to destroy my parents' lives. Mitchell nodded firmly. We have the perimeter secured, Ms. Riley. No one is getting past us. I walked past my sister, ignoring her panicked questions, and headed straight up the stairs to Sydney's bedroom. I knocked once and opened the door. My niece was sitting on her bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, surrounded by hastily packed duffel bags. Her eyes were wide with terror. Grab your bags, Sydney, I told her gently but firmly. You are coming with me. We are going to my apartment. You are safe now. She did not hesitate. She grabbed her bags and followed me down the stairs past her weeping mother and out into my car. Once Sydney was securely buckled into the passenger seat, I locked the doors and connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system. I took a deep breath and dialed my father's number. He answered it on the very first ring. Riley, he said, his voice laced with false hope. Did you change your mind? Did you bring the money to Courtney? Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, staring blankly out the windshield at Mitchell's security team guarding the house. I know you and Mom lied to me at my apartment. I know you claimed you willingly signed those loan documents to save Jamal face. But you need to drop the act right now because your golden son-in-law just took everything. What are you talking about? My father asked, his tone shifting from hopeful to defensive. I told you we agreed to the second mortgage. We knew the risks. Did you agree to a total power of attorney? I snapped, my patience entirely gone. Did you agree to let him access your secure retirement portal? Silence echoed through the car speakers. I could hear the television playing in the background at their house. Because my fraud detection software just flagged a massive transaction, I continued, my voice cold and surgical. 10 minutes ago, Jamal logged into your Vanguard accounts. He liquidated your entire pension. He drained Mom's 401k. He took the $300,000 you spent 40 years saving and he wired it offshore. No, my father gasped, the sound practically tearing from his throat. No, that is impossible. The bank would call us. They would verify it. He used the forged power of attorney, I explained ruthlessly. He bypassed the security checks because legally he made himself you. He took the equity from your house and now he has taken your retirement. He did not run because of the loan sharks, Dad. He ran because he successfully robbed you blind. You have exactly $0 to your name. I heard a clattering sound like a phone dropping onto a hardwood floor, followed by my mother's voice in the distance, asking what was wrong. Then came a sound I will never forget. It was a loud, aggressive pounding on their front door. Dad! I called out loudly. Dad, what is happening? My father picked up the dropped phone, his voice shaking violently. Riley, there are men in suits at the door. They have clipboards. They are putting a padlock on the front gate. The bank. They are locking us out. I hung up the phone. The sharp disconnect click echoed in the silent car. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It was done. The facade had completely shattered. My parents were homeless, penniless, and finally facing the reality of the monster they had chosen to protect. A quiet sniffle came from the passenger seat. I turned to look at Sydney. She was gripping the seatbelt tightly, staring straight ahead with wide, terrified eyes. She had heard everything. Aunt Riley, she whispered, her voice trembling, is my dad a bad person? I reached over and gently squeezed her shoulder. Your dad made terrible choices, Sydney, but his choices do not define who you are. You are safe now. That is all that matters. I put the car in drive and pulled away from Courtney's house, leaving Mitchell and his team to deal with whatever fallout was coming. I needed to get Sydney to my penthouse, get her settled, and figure out my next move. The rest of the day was a tense blur. I ordered takeout, set Sydney up in the guest bedroom, and spent hours on secure lines with my legal team and corporate security. By evening, Mitchell confirmed that the loan sharks had indeed shown up at Courtney's house, but they quickly scattered when they saw the armed security detail. Courtney was physically unharmed but emotionally destroyed. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind racing. I needed to go to the office. There were board meetings I had already postponed, and my company could not grind to a halt just because my family was imploding. I arranged for a private security guard to stay with Sydney at the penthouse and headed to my corporate headquarters in Silicon Valley. My company building was a testament to everything I had built from the ground up. It was a massive, ultra-modern structure of steel and glass dominating the skyline. The lobby was a sprawling expanse of white marble and minimalist design, buzzing with the energy of hundreds of brilliant engineers and financial analysts. I walked through the revolving doors, exchanging brief nods with my staff as I made my way toward the private executive elevators. But before I could even scan my badge, a commotion near the reception desk caught my attention. I recognized the shrill, frantic voice instantly. I demand to see her right now. Barbara screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You tell Riley to get down here immediately, or I will have this entire building shut down. I stopped in my tracks, an icy wave of disbelief washing over me. After everything that had happened, after Jamal had literally stolen their life savings and my parents had somehow found their way to my office. I walked slowly toward the reception area. My father was standing slightly behind Barbara, looking pale, exhausted, and deeply humiliated. He clutched a crumpled manila folder to his chest. Barbara, however, was in full manic mode. She was leaning over the reception desk, jabbing her finger at the terrified young receptionist. "Mother," I said loudly, my voice cutting through the noise. Barbara spun around. For a split second, her eyes widened as she took in the sheer scale of the building. She looked at the towering glass walls, the sleek security gates, and the dozens of employees pausing to watch the scene. This was the first time she had ever seen my professional life. She was standing in the epicenter of the empire I had built after she told me I was worthless. But instead of awe or realization, her expression twisted into a mask of pure, resentful fury. She refused to acknowledge the reality around her. In her mind, I was still the disobedient daughter who needed to be put in her place. "There you are," she snapped, marching toward me. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" I signaled to the two security guards standing nearby to hold their positions, but to stay close. "What I have done," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "You show up at my corporate headquarters after your son-in-law bankrupts you, and you ask what I have done?" Barbara pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Do not try to turn this around on us. We went to the bank this morning. They locked us out of our house, Riley. They said the accounts are empty. This is your fault." "My fault?" I asked, genuinely stunned by her Olympic-level mental gymnastics. "Jamal forged your signatures, stole your pension, and fled the country. How exactly is that my fault?" "Because you pushed him," my mother hissed, stepping closer. "You threatened him with your fancy lawyers. You backed him into a corner. If you had just given Courtney the college fund yesterday, he would not have panicked. He would not have taken our money to pay off those men. You forced him to do it. You destroyed this family just to prove a point." I stared at her, the final threads of any lingering daughterly affection snapping violently. She was utterly incapable of admitting she was wrong. She would rather blame me for existing than hold Jamal accountable for his crimes. "Dad," I said, looking past her to my father, "do you believe this too? Do you honestly think I caused this?" My father looked down at his shoes, gripping the manila folder tighter. He did not say a word. His silence was louder than Barbara's screaming. I took a deep breath, the cold, calculating CEO taking over completely. I looked at my mother, my eyes hard and devoid of any emotion. "You are delusional, Mother, and you are trespassing. Leave my building right now before I have you thrown out." Barbara's eyes bulged. The sheer audacity of me, the daughter she had always treated like dirt. Ordering her out of my own building was the match that lit the powder keg. She did not just yell, she erupted. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Barbara shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the marble walls and glass panels of the lobby. People stopped in their tracks. Dozens of employees, executives in tailored suits, and visiting clients turned to stare at the crazed woman having a meltdown by the reception desk. My father tried to grab her arm, whispering frantically for her to keep her voice down, but she violently shoved him away. "No, Richard, I will not keep my voice down," Barbara screamed, stepping aggressively toward me. "I want everyone in this building to know exactly what kind of person their boss really is. She is a liar, a jealous, vindictive liar." I stood perfectly still, my face a mask of absolute calm. The two security guards shifted their weight, waiting for my signal, but I held up a hand, silently instructing them to hold off. I wanted to hear exactly how deep her delusion went. "You faked those documents, Riley," Barbara hissed, pointing her finger so close to my face I could feel the air move. "You used your little computers to fake that bank statement. You hacked into our accounts to make it look like Jamal took the money. You did it to ruin Courtney's marriage because you are so bitterly jealous of her." I almost laughed. "Jealous?" I asked softly. "Yes, jealous," Barbara yelled, turning to the crowd of onlookers as if presenting a case to a jury. She has always been jealous of her sister. Courtney is beautiful. Courtney has a loving husband. Courtney has a child. And what do you have, Riley? You have a cold, empty glass building and a bank account. You cannot stand that Jamal chose your sister over you, so you framed him. You forged that power of attorney to make him look like a criminal. The level of gaslighting was genuinely breathtaking. Jamal had stolen her house, drained her life savings, and fled the country, leaving her homeless. And yet here she was standing in the lobby of my multi-million-dollar company, accusing me of hacking a federal bank just to ruin my sister's perfectly toxic marriage. There is no fake data, Mother, I said, keeping my voice steady and reasonable so the entire lobby could see exactly who the irrational one was. You called the bank yourself. You said they locked you out of the house. Did I fake the bank manager too? Did I fake the padlock on your front door? They are in on it, Barbara screamed, completely losing her grip on reality. You paid them off. You have enough money to buy anyone. You set Jamal up so those loan sharks would come after him, and now you are trying to steal my granddaughter. She was hyperventilating, now her face a terrifying shade of purple. My father was crying silently, clutching the useless manila folder completely broken by the reality his wife refused to face. You are going to fix this right now, Barbara demanded, her voice vibrating with hysterical desperation. You are going to get on your computer and you are going to wire $350,000 into Jamal's account, and then you are going to pay off our mortgage. I am doing no such thing, I replied flatly. Barbara's eyes darted wildly around the lobby. She saw a heavy, sharp-edged brass stanchion holding the velvet ropes near the elevator bank. Before anyone could react, she lunged for it. She grabbed the heavy metal pole, knocking it over with a loud crash, and backed herself against the glass wall. She picked up a shattered piece of the brass fitting that snapped off the base. She held the jagged metal edge right against her own wrist. The entire lobby gasped in collective horror. Wire the money! Riley Barbara screamed, her eyes wide and completely deranged. I will do it. I will slice my wrists right here in front of all your employees. I will bleed out on your pristine marble floor. I will say you drove me to it. I will ruin your company. I will ruin your life. Give Jamal the money. Dad dropped to his knees, begging her to drop the metal. But Barbara ignored him, pressing the jagged edge harder against her skin, her eyes locked on mine with a terrifying madness. She truly believed that public humiliation and the threat of a gruesome spectacle would finally break me. She thought I would sacrifice my niece's future and my own wealth just to avoid a scandal. I stared at my mother, watching the jagged piece of brass tremble against her skin. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Every employee, every client, and every security guard was frozen. They expected me to beg, to negotiate, to do whatever it took to stop this woman from hurting herself in the middle of my company headquarters. My father sobbed, his hands hovering uselessly as he pleaded with her to put the metal down. Barbara kept her manic eyes locked on mine, chest heaving. She was waiting for the surrender. She expected the little girl she had abused for decades to finally submit to her control. I did not flinch. I just looked at her with a profound, hollow pity. Do it, I said. My voice carried clearly across the silent marble floor. Barbara froze. The triumphant glint in her eyes wavered, replaced by genuine confusion. What did you say? She whispered, her grip loosening. I said do it, I repeated, stepping closer. If you truly want to end your life over a con artist who stole your retirement, then go ahead. But I am not giving you a single dollar. I am not saving your house, and I will never let you hold me hostage with your toxic theatrics ever again. Barbara stared at me, paralyzed. The reality finally crashed down on her. The ultimate weapon in her narcissistic arsenal had failed. She threatened the unthinkable, and I simply opened the door for her. She did not want to die. She only wanted to control me. In that moment, she realized she had lost me forever. The jagged metal slipped from her hand, clattering loudly onto the polished floor. I made a sharp gesture to the head of my security detail. Get them out of my building, I ordered. The team moved with lightning precision. 2 heavily armed guards flanked Barbara, immediately grabbing her arms and spinning her toward the doors. 2 others hoisted my father off his knees, ignoring his weak protests. Let go of me! Barbara shrieked, the shock instantly dissolving into uncontrollable rage. "You cannot do this to me. I am your mother. I gave you life. You gave me a nightmare I shot back. And now you are waking up." I walked behind the security detail as they physically escorted them toward the revolving doors. My father did not fight back. He hung his head in defeat. But Barbara thrashed and kicked screaming obscenities, completely destroying whatever was left of her dignity in front of hundreds of onlookers. At the threshold of the lobby, I signaled the guards to stop for 1 second. I stood inside the glass doors looking at the two people who spent my life trying to tear me down. "You are officially banned from this property," I told them, my tone carrying the unbreakable weight of absolute authority. "Your names and photos are flagged in the facial recognition system. If you ever set foot near this building or my apartment, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Do not call or text me. You are no longer my family." I nodded to the guards. They shoved my parents through the revolving doors and out onto the concrete pavement. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind them, locking with a definitive click. I watched Barbara pound her fists against the thick, reinforced glass from the outside. Her mouth was moving, screaming words I could no longer hear. The soundproof glass blocked her completely. For the first time in my 32 years, the barrier between us was physical, impenetrable, and entirely under my control. I turned to face my lobby. The employees were still standing in shocked silence. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer, took a deep breath, and addressed the room. "I apologize for the disruption," everyone, I said, clearly projecting an air of absolute calm. "The situation has been resolved. Please return to your work." Slowly, the crowd dispersed. The building began to hum with its usual corporate energy. I walked to the private elevator, swiped my badge, and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, isolating me in the quiet steel box, a massive weight lifted off my chest. I had finally severed the chain. But the war was not over. Jamal was still hiding out there, and I had to secure my niece's future. I spent the rest of the day in executive board meetings, forcefully compartmentalizing the chaos to keep my business running. By the time the sun set, violent storm clouds rolled over the valley, unleashing a torrential downpour. I wrapped up my final conference call, packed my briefcase, and headed home. I had absolutely no idea that the most dangerous part of this nightmare was just about to begin. The storm hit the Bay Area with a vengeance, rattling the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The rain lashed against the glass in heavy sideways sheets, completely obscuring the city lights below. I sat at my kitchen island, a half-empty glass of red wine next to my laptop, reviewing the final encrypted files of Jamal's financial crimes. Mitchell had assured me that the loan sharks had not returned to Courtney's house, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Desperate men did not just walk away from $200,000. I was just about to close my laptop and try to get some sleep when a sharp, jarring noise pierced the quiet of my apartment. It was the intercom buzzer. I glanced at the digital clock on the stove. It was past midnight. I walked over to the security monitor, fully expecting to see Mitchell or one of his security personnel. Instead, the grainy night vision camera showed a small, drenched figure huddled against the sleek marble wall of the lobby entrance downstairs. I pressed the two-way radio button. "Hello, Aunt Riley," a small, shaking voice answered. My blood ran cold. "Sydney, please," the voice cracked, barely audible over the sound of the wind. "Please let me in." I slammed my hand onto the door release button, bypassing the concierge entirely. "Take the private elevator, Sydney. Come straight up." I grabbed a thick towel from the bathroom and threw open my front door. A minute later, the private elevator chimed softly. The steel doors slid open and my niece stepped into my hallway. She looked absolutely horrific. She was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered against her face in dark, wet streaks. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin, oversized t-shirt and sweatpants that clung to her shivering frame. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. There was a dark purple bruise blooming across her left cheekbone. "Sydney," I breathed, rushing forward and wrapping the heavy towel around her trembling shoulders. I pulled her inside, locking the door firmly behind us. I guided her to the nearest bar stool at the kitchen island, completely ignoring the puddle of water forming on the hardwood floor. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" I asked, my voice tight with a mixture of panic and rising fury. Do I need to call an ambulance? She shook her head weakly, clutching the towel around herself. No, just my face. And my arm. I gently pushed her wet hair back, examining the bruise under the bright kitchen lights. It was fresh. The skin was slightly swollen, the edges a harsh red turning to purple. I ran my hands down her arm, feeling a slight wince as I touched her elbow, but nothing felt broken. Who did this? I demanded, though I already knew the answer. My dad, she whispered, tears finally mixing with the rainwater on her face. He came back. I froze. Jamal came back. She nodded, staring blankly at the marble countertop. He sneaked through the back door an hour ago. The security guys you sent were watching the front, but he knew the code to the garage keypad. He was acting crazy, Aunt Riley. He was pacing around the living room screaming at my mom about the house being locked up. I grabbed my phone from the counter. I am calling Mitchell. We need to send the police. No, wait, Sydney pleaded, reaching out and grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. Please don't. He's not there anymore. What do you mean he is not there? I asked, lowering the phone, but keeping my thumb hovering over the screen. He came to my room, she explained, her voice shaking uncontrollably. I was on my laptop. I was trying to study for my AP history test. He grabbed the computer right out of my hands and threw it against the wall. He said I was wasting time. He said if I wanted to be so smart, I needed to figure out how to give him the money. The money. The 529 account. She nodded again, a fresh wave of tears spilling over. He told me he knew I had a password. He said because the account was in my name, I could just log in and wire the money to his crypto wallet. I told him I didn't know how. I told him I didn't have access. But he didn't believe me. My hands balled into fists at my sides. He hit you because he thought you were hiding the password. He slapped me, she whispered, touching her bruised cheek lightly. Then he grabbed my arm and tried to drag me down the stairs. My mom tried to stop him. She was screaming at him to let me go. That's when the security guys heard the yelling and kicked the front door open. My heart hammered against my ribs. And Jamal. He let me go and ran out the back door into the woods behind our house. Sydney said, her voice dropping to a hollow monotone. The security guys chased him, but it was too dark. I didn't wait to see what happened. I grabbed my phone, climbed out my bedroom window, and walked to the bus station. I rode the bus as far as I could and walked the rest of the way here. I stared at the 16-year-old girl sitting in my kitchen. She had just survived a violent assault by her own father, escaped a chaotic house, and navigated a city bus system in the middle of a massive thunderstorm just to find me. She was incredibly brave, but she was completely traumatized. I pulled her into a tight hug, pressing her wet head against my shoulder. I've got you, Sydney. I promise you, he is never going to touch you again. I pulled back, intending to go make her some hot tea and find her dry clothes. But as she moved, a small silver object slipped out of the pocket of her wet sweatpants and clattered onto the marble counter. I looked down at it. It was a standard silver USB flash drive. Sydney picked it up with shaking hands. I didn't just come here to hide Aunt Riley. When he dragged me into the hallway, I saw his office door was open. I knew he kept all his important stuff on this drive. I grabbed it off his desk before I climbed out the window. She held the drive out to me, her eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, determined intensity that mirrored my own. I think this is how we stop him. I stared at the small, silver rectangle resting on her palm. It felt heavier than it looked. I gently took the flash drive from her fingers, my mind racing with the implications of what she had just handed me. If this drive held what she thought it did, Jamal was not just a runaway con artist. He was holding a ticking time bomb. I need you to go take a hot shower, Sydney, I told her. There are fresh towels in the guest bathroom. I will leave dry clothes outside the door. You did an incredibly brave thing tonight, but let me handle the rest. Sydney nodded, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. She slid off the bar stool and headed down the hallway, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood. Once I heard the bathroom door click shut and the shower water running, I grabbed my laptop, pulled up a chair at the kitchen island, and inserted the silver drive. I did not just open the files directly. As the chief executive officer of a cybersecurity and financial tech firm, I knew better than to trust an unknown device. I ran it through an isolated virtual sandbox, first scanning for malware or tracking software. Jamal was sloppy, but I was not taking any chances. Once the system flashed green confirming the drive was clean, I bypassed the rudimentary password protection he had installed. It took my software exactly 14 seconds to crack his pathetic code. The folder popped open on my screen. I clicked on the main file, a massive spreadsheet labeled Offshore Master. I braced myself, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer scale of the devastation staring back at me. Line after line, row after row, Jamal had meticulously documented his entire Ponzi scheme. He had listed the names, addresses, and account numbers of every single person he had scammed over the last 4 years. I scrolled down, feeling a sickening knot tighten in my stomach. There were over 200 names on this list. Most of them were elderly people from his own community, people who trusted him. He had convinced retired teachers, bus drivers, and factory workers to hand over their life savings, promising them massive returns in the cryptocurrency market. Beside each name was the amount they had invested, followed by the actual destination of those funds. None of it went to the blockchain. It went to a series of dummy corporations registered in the Caribbean. I found the entry for my parents, Richard and Barbara, $315,000. Status marked as liquidated. Beside their name in a column labeled Notes, Jamal had typed 2 words: debt relief. He had not just robbed them, he had cataloged their ruin like a grocery list. But as I dug deeper into the hidden folders, I found something even more damning. It was not just a ledger of stolen money. It was a digital paper trail of massive coordinated federal tax evasion. Jamal had been falsifying tax returns for his shell companies, laundering the stolen funds through fake real estate investments to hide the illicit income from the government. He was defrauding the Internal Revenue Service out of millions of dollars. My phone buzzed loudly on the counter, startling me. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Courtney. I ignored it and clicked on another file, a folder labeled Legal. Inside were scanned copies of forged documents. The fake power of attorney he used to drain my parents' retirement accounts was right at the top. Below it were forged signatures on bank transfers, fake investment portfolios he used to bait his victims, and email threads with the violent loan sharks he was currently running from. Sydney had not just brought me a weapon. She had brought me a guillotine. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Courtney, then a third, then a fourth. I picked up the device and opened the message thread. The texts were not apologetic. They were frantic, furious, and threatening. I know Sydney is with you. Bring her back right now, or I am calling the police. Jamal called me. He told me what you did to his office. He said Sydney stole his property. If you do not give it back, and if you do not bring my daughter home by tomorrow morning, I am pressing charges against you for kidnapping. I stared at the glowing screen, a cold, humorless smile spreading across my face. Courtney was still defending a man who had hit her daughter. Let them try, I whispered to the empty room, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had every single piece of evidence I needed to lock him away forever, and I was going to absolutely destroy him. I blocked Courtney's number. I could not afford any distractions. I picked up my laptop and moved from the kitchen island to my formal home office. This room was a fortress of technology equipped with 3 massive curved monitors linked directly to my company's secure servers. I plugged the decrypted silver flash drive into the mainframe docking station. My preliminary scan had shown me the surface of Jamal's crimes, but now it was time to let my proprietary financial algorithms do what they were built for. I was going to map every single dirty penny. I opened my company's flagship tracking software, a program currently used by Federal Reserve banks to detect international money laundering. I imported the entire contents of Jamal's offshore master spreadsheet. I set the parameters to cross-reference public property records, registered business entities, and offshore banking routing numbers. I hit execute and watched as the screens went dark. A moment later, they illuminated with a complex glowing web of interconnected data points. What I saw made my blood run cold. Jamal was not just running a small scam. He had built a highly sophisticated financial syndicate. The algorithm quickly untangled the mess of the Ponzi scheme. I watched the digital pathways trace how he operated. He would target vulnerable retirees at his country club and local community centers. He promised them guaranteed high-yield returns through a fake algorithmic trading bot he claimed to have invented. But there was no bot. The money never went to the stock market. Instead, the funds were funneled into a central holding account. When early investors asked for their dividends, Jamal simply paid them using the life savings of the newest victims. It was a classic, devastating pyramid of lies. I clicked on a cluster of data points representing the victims. The algorithm had pulled their public profiles based on the names in Jamal's ledger. My heart sank as I recognized some of them. There was Mrs. Higgins, my old high school biology teacher who had invested her entire pension. There was the owner of the local bakery, where my family used to buy birthday cakes. Jamal had systematically targeted the people who trusted my parents, leveraging my family's good reputation in the community to lower their defenses. He had financially ruined dozens of innocent families just to fund his luxury cars and designer watches. But stealing from retirees was only half the picture. The algorithm flagged a massive, glaring anomaly in how the funds were being categorized. I opened a new window and started digging into the tax documents hidden in the legal folder. Jamal had registered 4 different limited liability companies in Delaware. He was funneling the stolen money through these shell corporations, claiming the cash injections as massive business losses and depreciating assets. By falsifying his corporate tax returns, he wiped out his tax liability. He was blatantly committing federal tax evasion on a multi-million-dollar scale. The Internal Revenue Service does not play games with wire fraud, but they are absolutely ruthless when it comes to tax evasion. Jamal had forged documents to hide his ill-gotten gains from the federal government, effectively stealing from the United States Treasury. I spent the next 4 hours meticulously linking every fake wire transfer to the fraudulent tax returns. I created an irrefutable digital paper trail that even a first-year accounting student could follow. By the time I finished compiling the data, the sky outside my floor-to-ceiling windows was turning a pale, bruised purple. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a cold and quiet dawn. I sat back in my leather chair, rubbing my tired eyes. I had spent the entire night building an airtight case. On my desk sat 3 separate encrypted digital dossiers. One contained the proof of the Ponzi scheme and the forged power of attorney for my parents' house. One contained the detailed evidence of the federal tax evasion. The final dossier was a complete list of his victims and the exact amounts they were owed. I printed hard copies of the most damning documents, the forged signatures, the fake tax filings, and the offshore account routing numbers. I arranged them into neat, devastatingly powerful physical folders. I was not just going to hand this over to the local police. Local cops did not have the jurisdiction or the resources to untangle an international offshore web of this magnitude. This required the heavy artillery. I needed federal agents. I picked up my phone, ready to make the calls that would permanently end Jamal's freedom. But before my finger could even tap Mitchell's personal contact name, the bright digital screen lit up with an urgent new incoming email message from a brand new attorney claiming to represent my sister Courtney. I did not reply to Courtney's new email. I simply forwarded it directly to Mitchell, adding it to the mountain of evidence we had already compiled against Jamal and his pathetic legal team. It was almost comical how predictable they were. They thought they could still control the narrative through sheer intimidation, completely unaware that I had spent the night dissecting every dark corner of their financial reality. I stood up, my joints stiff from sitting at the computer for 10 straight hours. I walked out of my office and headed toward the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. As I passed the guest bedroom, the door cracked open. Sydney peeked out, looking significantly better than the drowned, terrified teenager who had arrived the night before. She was wearing the oversized MIT sweatshirt I had left for her, the crimson fabric contrasting sharply with the fading purple bruise on her cheek. "Did you sleep?" I asked, gently leaning against the doorframe. "A little," she admitted, stepping out into the hallway. "Did he call? Did he come back?" "He is not coming back, Sydney." I promised her, my voice unwavering. "He is running, and he is not going to get far." I guided her into the kitchen and poured her a glass of orange juice. As she sat at the island, my phone vibrated loudly against the marble counter. I glanced at the screen. It was Courtney again. This time she was calling. I let it ring 3 times before I hit accept and put her on speakerphone. I wanted Sydney to hear exactly who her mother really was, to shatter any lingering illusions that Courtney was just a helpless victim in all of this. "You have until 3 o'clock today," Riley Courtney snapped the second the line connected. Her voice was devoid of any sisterly warmth, replaced by a cold, desperate venom. "Good morning to you too, Courtney," I replied smoothly. "3 o'clock for what exactly?" "Do not play games with me," she hissed. "I know Sydney is with you. Jamal told me you practically abducted her from the house while his back was turned. You are going to bring her to my lawyer's office at 3 o'clock sharp, and you are going to sign the paperwork transferring the 529 account to my name. And if I don't," I asked, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "If you don't, I am calling the police," Courtney threatened, her voice rising an octave. "I will tell them you kidnapped my minor child across state lines. I will tell them you are holding her hostage to extort money from our family. You will be arrested, Riley. Your precious company will be all over the news for having a felon as a CEO. You will lose everything." Sydney gasped softly from her bar stool, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. She could not believe her own mother was threatening to weaponize the police with fabricated kidnapping charges just to steal her college fund. I looked at Sydney, giving her a reassuring nod before turning my attention back to the phone. "You really want to involve the police, Courtney?" I asked, my tone dripping with dangerous amusement. "Are you absolutely sure that is the route you want to take? Because once the authorities start looking into your family's finances, they are not going to stop at a custody dispute." "What is that supposed to mean?" she demanded, a hint of unease finally piercing through her arrogant facade. "It means I accept your invitation," I said coldly. 3 o'clock. Send me the address of your lawyer's office. But let me be perfectly clear, Courtney. I am not bringing Sydney. She is staying right here in my secure building, far away from the toxic nightmare you call a home. I will be coming alone." "You cannot keep her from me," Courtney shrieked. "I am her mother. I have legal rights." "You lost your rights the second you stood by and let your husband strike her across the face," I fired back, my voice echoing loudly in the kitchen. There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end of the line. Courtney had not expected me to know about the assault. He didn't mean to," Courtney stammered, her voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. "He was just stressed. He was trying to protect our family." "He hit your child," I stated, enunciating every word with glacial precision. "And you are defending him. You are a disgrace, Courtney. I will see you at 3. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I turned back to Sydney. She was staring at the phone, tears welling in her eyes, the brutal reality of her mother's betrayal settling in. "I am sorry you had to hear that," I told her softly. "It is okay," she whispered, wiping a tear from her unbruised cheek. "She chose him over me. She always chooses him." "Not anymore," I promised her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Today is the last day they ever dictate the terms of your life. Eat some breakfast. I have a very important meeting to prepare for." I walked back into my office and picked up my secure line. It was time to call in the heavy artillery. I bypassed Mitchell entirely and dialed a number I had acquired through my company's federal contracts. "Agent Harrison," I said, when the gruff voice answered on the second ring. "This is Riley. I have a major federal tax evasion case ready for you. Complete digital paper trail, forged documents, and a flight risk currently attempting to extort me." "I am listening." "The IRS." Special Agent replied, his tone instantly shifting to professional interest. "I need you to meet me at 3 o'clock this afternoon," I told him, glancing at the 3 massive dossiers sitting on my desk. "And bring handcuffs." "Bring handcuffs," I told Agent Foster, keeping my eyes locked on the blinking cursor of my terminal. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Foster was a seasoned investigator with the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. We had crossed paths 2 years ago when my firm helped the government untangle a massive offshore laundering ring. He knew I did not exaggerate or waste his valuable time. "I need a warrant for handcuffs," Riley Foster replied, his tone all business. "And federal judges do not sign warrants just because you ask nicely." "Check your secure server," I said, tapping the enter key. "I just pushed a compressed file directly to your terminal. It contains the master ledger offshore routing numbers and 4 years of deliberately falsified corporate tax returns. The total defrauded amount is north of $4 million. He is currently a flight risk trying to extort me for cash to pay off underground debt collectors. You have 5 hours to get a magistrate to sign off." A minute later, Foster let out a low whistle. "This is an absolute goldmine. I will have the federal warrant signed. Text me the exact address." I ended the call. 1 down, 2 to go. My next call was to completely neutralize Courtney's absurd kidnapping threat. I dialed a direct number for the State Department of Child and Family Services, specifically a senior investigator named Ms. Dalton, whom my legal team frequently retained. "Investigator Dalton," she answered briskly. "This is Riley," I said. "I have an emergency custody situation. A 16-year-old girl fled her home last night after being physically assaulted by her father. The mother was present, failed to intervene, and is currently demanding the child be returned to the hostile environment where violent debt collectors have already shown up." Dalton's tone shifted instantly. "Is the minor safe right now?" "She is secure in my penthouse," I confirmed. "I have time-stamped photos of her facial bruising. I am meeting the mother at a law office at 3 o'clock today. The mother plans to use false kidnapping allegations to extort me for the child's college trust fund. I need you there with an emergency protective order granting me temporary custody. I will fast-track the paperwork based on the physical abuse and the home endangerment," Dalton assured me. "Send me the photos and the location. I will see you at 3. The final call was to Mitchell. "I need you to meet me at the penthouse in 1 hour," I instructed my lead counsel. "We are going to a meeting with Courtney's new attorney. I want you to let them talk. Let them put their extortion demands on the record. Do not interrupt them until I give the signal. We need their complete arrogance on full display before we drop the hammer. I want them to feel entirely in control right up until the very last second." "Understood," Mitchell said, his voice practically radiating anticipation. "We will be ready." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. The trap was set. Every single escape route Jamal and Courtney thought they had was completely sealed. I walked back out to the kitchen. Sydney was staring nervously out the massive windows. "I have to go to a very important meeting this afternoon," I told her, keeping my voice gentle but incredibly confident. "You are going to stay here. I am leaving 2 of my best security guards right outside the front door, and the building concierge knows not to let anyone up without my explicit permission. You are perfectly safe." Sydney looked at me. Her dark eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Are you going to see my mom?" "Yes," I answered honestly. "She thinks she is going to force me to give up your college fund, but she is in for a very rude awakening. By the time I get back, you will never have to worry about living in that house again." She nodded slowly, trusting me completely. I retreated to my master bedroom to prepare. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a corporate execution. I bypassed my casual clothes and pulled out a sharp, perfectly tailored charcoal gray power suit. I paired it with a crisp white blouse and black stiletto heels. I tied my hair back into a sleek, severe style. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the terrified 19-year-old girl whose mother tore up her college acceptance letter. I saw a predator at the top of the food chain. I placed the physical dossiers into my heavy leather briefcase, meticulously ensuring the forged power of attorney, the fake tax returns, and the detailed victim ledger were perfectly tabbed. I snapped the briefcase shut and headed out. Mitchell was waiting in the lobby. We walked to the waiting SUV in silence. We pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of Courtney's lawyer right at 2:55. It was time to end this nightmare once and for all. The law office of Courtney's new attorney was exactly what I expected. It was located in a strip mall off the highway, sandwiched between a discount mattress store and a struggling dry cleaner. The waiting room smelled faintly of stale carpet and cheap vanilla air freshener. Mitchell and I walked in completely out of place in our high-end corporate attire. A bored receptionist pointed us toward the conference room down the hall. Mitchell opened the heavy wooden door and we stepped inside. The scene was almost laughable. Courtney, Barbara, and to my complete lack of surprise, Jamal were sitting on one side of a long, scuffed mahogany table. So much for fleeing the country. He had clearly realized that abandoning his family without the $350,000 college fund meant running with absolutely nothing. He had scurried back, hoping his new lawyer's extortion attempt would force my hand before the loan sharks or the authorities caught up to him. Jamal was wearing a flashy tailored suit that he undoubtedly bought with stolen money. He leaned back in his leather chair, trying to project an aura of untouchable confidence. Courtney sat next to him, her arms crossed, a smug, victorious smirk playing on her lips. Barbara sat at the end of the table, looking incredibly pleased with herself, as if her psychotic meltdown in my lobby yesterday had never happened. At the head of the table sat a balding, sweat-stained attorney who introduced himself as Mr. Vance. "Please have a seat," Vance said, gesturing to the empty chairs opposite my family. He did not bother to stand. "I see you brought counsel, Ms. Riley. I suppose that is standard for someone in your position, but I assure you this is a straightforward administrative transfer. There is no need to make this difficult." Mitchell and I sat down. We did not open our briefcases, we just looked at them. "Let us skip the pleasantries," Jamal said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "You got the letter. You know why we are here. You thought you could come into my house, disrespect my wife, and try to steal my daughter with your fake little trust fund stunt. But you messed with the wrong man, Riley," Courtney chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "Where is Sydney? I told you to bring her." "She is safe," I replied flatly. "That is all you need to know." Vance cleared his throat loudly. "My client has made it perfectly clear that if the minor child is not returned to her legal guardians, and if the hoarded funds are not transferred immediately, we will be forced to contact local law enforcement and file kidnapping charges. We have the transfer documents already prepared." He slid a stack of legal papers across the table. They stopped right in front of me. "All you need to do is sign on the dotted line," Barbara said, folding her hands neatly on the table. "And then this ugly little misunderstanding can be over. You can go back to your empty apartment and Jamal can fix the problems you caused. It is the least you can do after trying to destroy this family." I looked down at the papers. It was a complete surrender of custodial rights to the 529 plan, transferring total control to Jamal. It was exactly what he needed to pay off the underground debt collectors and fund his escape. Jamal smirked, pulling a gold-plated pen from his suit jacket and tossing it across the table. It landed with a clatter next to the documents. "Sign it." Jamal commanded, his voice thick with unearned authority. "You thought you were so smart playing with your little computers. But out here in the real world, you do not hold the cards. I do. Sign the paper, wire the money to my account, and maybe I will not have you arrested today." I picked up the gold pen. I examined it slowly, letting the silence stretch out in the stuffy conference room. I looked at Courtney, who was practically vibrating with greed. I looked at Barbara, whose eyes were filled with the toxic satisfaction of finally seeing me defeated. And then I looked at Jamal, the arrogant, abusive con artist who thought he had outsmarted a multi-million-dollar financial intelligence CEO. "You really think you won, don't you?" I asked softly. Jamal chuckled. "I know I did." I placed the pen back down on the table right next to the unsigned documents. "Mitchell," I said, without taking my eyes off Jamal, "please inform Mr. Vance of the reality of this situation." Mitchell smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory smile. He reached down and snapped open the locks on his heavy leather briefcase. The loud click echoed like a gunshot in the small room. He pulled out the first thick red tab dossier and tossed it heavily onto the center of the table. I watched Jamal's eyes lock onto the red tabbed dossier Mitchell had just slammed onto the table. The sheer physical weight of the file seemed to mock the single, pathetic sheet of paper his lawyer had presented. "What is that?" Jamal asked, his arrogant facade slipping just a fraction. "A counteroffer. I told you I am not negotiating. You sign the funds over or I walk." Mitchell did not answer. He simply flipped the cover of the dossier open. The first page was a high-resolution, color-printed scan of the forged power of attorney Jamal had used to drain my parents' retirement accounts. Mitchell spun the binder around so the document faced Jamal directly. Jamal's jaw visibly tightened. He recognized the document instantly. Vance leaned over, adjusting his glasses to read the page. He frowned, clearly confused. "What is this?" "This has nothing to do with the 529 Educational Trust. It has everything to do with why we are here," Mitchell said, his voice cold and commanding. "My client will not be signing any transfer documents today. Nor will she be returning the minor child to a home where she was physically assaulted by her father less than 24 hours ago." Courtney bolted upright in her chair. "You are lying. Jamal never hit her." "I did not lie, Courtney," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Jamal. "She showed up at my door, soaked to the bone with a bruise on her face. And she brought me a gift." I reached into my pocket and placed the small silver USB drive on top of the open dossier. Jamal stared at the flash drive. All the blood drained from his face. The cocky, untouchable aura he had walked in with evaporated in a single second. He knew exactly what that drive was. He knew his entire life was stored on it. "Where did you get that?" Jamal demanded, his voice suddenly thick with panic. "That is stolen property. You cannot use that." "Actually," Mitchell interjected smoothly, "we do not need to use it. We simply provided it to the proper authorities. The data contained on that drive, combined with my client's proprietary financial algorithms, has painted a very clear, very illegal picture of your recent activities, Mr. Jamal." Barbara scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. Stop with the dramatics, Riley. You hacked some computer files to make Jamal look bad. We already know. Just sign the papers and let us go." Vance, however, was no longer looking bored. The sweat on his forehead seemed to multiply as he realized he was sitting next to a client who had just been cornered by a major corporate legal team. "Ms. Riley," Vance said, holding up a hand, "if you are implying my client has committed a crime, I must advise him not to speak, and I must reiterate our intent to file kidnapping charges if the child is not returned." Before Vance could finish his empty threat, the heavy wooden doors of the conference room swung open with a loud, authoritative bang. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. I sat perfectly still, a cold smile touching my lips. I was not alone. Following right behind me were not just lawyers, but the full weight of the federal government and state protective services. A tall woman in a sharp navy suit walked in first, holding a clipboard. Behind her was a solidly built man in a windbreaker that had the letters IRS printed in bold yellow across the back. Two uniformed police officers stepped in behind them, blocking the exit entirely. Vance practically jumped out of his chair squeaking violently against the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" The woman in the navy suit stepped forward. "I am Investigator Dalton, with the Department of Child and Family Services. I have an emergency protective order signed by a state judge granting temporary immediate custody of the minor Sydney to her Aunt Riley." Courtney let out a sharp gasp. "No, you cannot do that. She is my daughter." Dalton looked at Courtney with absolute zero sympathy. "Ma'am, based on the photographic evidence of physical abuse and the admission that violent debt collectors have targeted your residence, the state has determined your home is an immediate threat to the child's safety. If you attempt to contact the minor without state supervision, you will be arrested." Courtney burst into hysterical tears, turning to Jamal for help. But Jamal was not looking at her. He was staring paralyzed at the man in the windbreaker. The man stepped forward, pulling a gold badge from his pocket. He looked directly at Jamal. "Mr. Jamal, I am Special Agent Foster with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service." Jamal opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Agent Foster pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest." Jamal stumbled backward, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He bumped hard into the back wall, his eyes darting quickly between the tall federal agent and the two armed police officers blocking the exit. "Arrest? For what?" Jamal stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "There must be some massive mistake. I have not done anything wrong. This is a private family dispute over a trust fund." Agent Foster stepped forward, unfolding the heavy parchment document. You are being charged with multiple severe federal offenses, including wire fraud, grand larceny, and federal tax evasion. Foster read, his voice booming. We have undeniable evidence that you orchestrated a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, defrauded elderly investors, and falsified corporate tax returns to hide stolen assets. Vance, the sweaty attorney who had been so arrogant minutes prior, threw himself against the wall to get away from his client. He grabbed his briefcase like a shield. I had absolutely no prior knowledge of these illicit financial activities, Vance stammered loudly, his voice cracking with fear. I formally withdraw my legal representation effective immediately. You cannot do this, Jamal yelled, looking at Vance with wide, desperate eyes. You are my lawyer. Do something. Vance bolted out the door without looking back, completely abandoning the sinking ship to save his own career and avoid any potential accessory charges that could end his miserable legal practice forever. I stood up slowly from my chair and carefully picked up the thick red tab dossier Mitchell had brought. I walked over and dropped the massive stack of forensic financial evidence directly onto the glass table. It landed with a heavy final thud. There is no mistake, Jamal, I said, my voice cold and precise. My software decrypted your hidden drive, the one Sydney brought to me. We found the master ledger, we found the offshore routing numbers, and we found the forged power of attorney you used to entirely liquidate my parents' retirement accounts. Courtney let out a blood-curdling scream. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the dark reality of her husband's crimes finally crashed down on her. Barbara sat frozen at the opposite end of the table, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. The smug smirk had been wiped from her wrinkled face, replaced by a pale, horrifying realization that she had blindly trusted the man who ruined her life. Agent Foster gestured sharply to the two uniformed police officers standing by the wooden doors. Take him into federal custody now, he ordered. The officers moved in immediately. They grabbed Jamal by the arms, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the hard mahogany table. Jamal kicked and thrashed wildly, shouting loud obscenities, but the officers were unfazed by his pathetic physical resistance. They yanked his arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing in the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. You have the right to remain silent. Agent Foster began reading Jamal his Miranda rights with practiced efficiency as the officers secured his wrists tightly. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Jamal twisted his head around violently, his face pressed against the glass tabletop. Courtney, he screamed, his voice raw with panic. Courtney, call my brother. Get the bail money. Tell them Riley set me up. Please help me. Courtney did not even look at him. She curled into a tight ball, weeping hysterically, finally realizing that the incredible luxury life she had been living was funded entirely by stolen money. Her expensive leased cars were bought with the hard-earned life savings of innocent people from their own neighborhood. I leaned down gracefully, placing my hands on the table right next to Jamal's sweating face. There is no bail money, Jamal, I whispered softly. The IRS has already frozen every single one of your domestic accounts. Your offshore shell companies are being seized as we speak. You are going to federal prison for a very long time, and you will never ever come near my niece again. Agent Foster grabbed Jamal by the collar of his expensive suit and hauled him roughly to his feet. Jamal's legs gave out and the officers had to drag him toward the door. He sobbed loudly, a pathetic broken sound that stripped away his arrogant facade. The officers pulled Jamal out of the conference room, his desperate cries fading slowly into the distance. Agent Foster picked up the red dossier from the table, tipped his head to me in silent acknowledgement, and followed them out, leaving a heavy, stunned silence in his wake. The heavy, stunned silence in the conference room lasted for exactly 5 seconds before Courtney completely shattered it. She collapsed onto the floor, her expensive designer dress pooling around her legs as she let out a guttural, agonizing wail. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire fabricated reality burn to the ground. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth, sobbing so violently her shoulders shook. My cars. Courtney choked out her priorities, remaining horrifically consistent even in the face of her husband being hauled away by federal agents. They are going to take my cars. And the country club. Oh my God, what am I going to tell my friends at the club? I looked down at my sister, feeling absolutely nothing. She was not crying because the man she loved had betrayed her. She was crying because the stolen money train had just derailed. She had built her entire identity around the illusion of wealth and superiority, never once questioning where the endless supply of cash was coming from. Now that glittering facade was destroyed, leaving her with nothing but the devastating reality of her own profound ignorance. Investigator Dalton stepped around the glass table, looking down at Courtney with professional detachment. Mrs. Courtney, my office will be in touch regarding the formal custody hearing for Sydney. Until then, you are legally barred from contacting her. I strongly suggest you find legal representation of your own, as it is highly likely the federal government will be seizing your primary residence and all assets purchased with fraudulent funds. Dalton did not wait for a response. She nodded respectfully to me and Mitchell, then exited the conference room. That left only Barbara. The luxurious reality she had ruthlessly guarded for decades was unraveling right before her eyes. My mother had been sitting perfectly still, her face entirely drained of color. But as the door closed behind the investigator, the shock finally wore off, and her deeply ingrained entitlement flared right back to life. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt, and turned her attention to me. She stepped over Courtney, completely ignoring her weeping golden child on the floor. Well, Barbara said, her voice shaking, but laced with that familiar demanding edge. I hope you are satisfied, Riley. You sent Jamal to prison. You took your sister's daughter. Now what are we supposed to do? Jamal was paying the bills. You need to release that college fund to us immediately so we can hire a lawyer for him and save Courtney's house. I did not even have to speak. Mitchell simply cleared his throat. He reached into his leather briefcase one last time. He did not pull out another thick dossier. Instead, he pulled out a crisp white envelope bearing the seal of a major national bank. He walked around the table and held it out to Barbara. My client will not be releasing any funds to you, Barbara Mitchell stated clearly, ensuring every word landed with devastating precision. Furthermore, you will not need to worry about saving Courtney's house because you have far more pressing residential issues to address. Barbara frowned, snatching the envelope from Mitchell's hand. What is this? Another one of your fake legal threats? That is a certified notice of foreclosure, Mitchell replied smoothly. As my client warned you earlier, Jamal forged your signature to take out a massive second mortgage on your home. Because he stopped making payments 3 months ago, and because the primary loan was already in default, the bank moved forward with an expedited foreclosure. Barbara ripped the envelope open, her eyes frantically scanning the dense legal jargon. I watched her hands begin to tremble uncontrollably as she read the bold text printed at the top of the page. The grace period expired at midnight, Mitchell continued, his tone entirely devoid of pity. At 8 o'clock this morning, the bank officially took possession of your property. The padlock you saw on your front door was not a mistake. The county sheriff executed the eviction order while you were sitting in my client's lobby throwing a tantrum. The paper slipped from Barbara's fingers, fluttering to the floor next to Courtney. Barbara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, controlling woman who had tormented me for my entire life was suddenly gone, replaced by a terrified, destitute stranger. You do not own that house anymore, Barbara, I said, my voice echoing coldly in the room. You have no assets. You have no retirement savings. Jamal stole every single penny you had to pay off his loan sharks, and you let him do it because you were too busy hating me to see the truth. You are officially homeless. The very end has finally arrived for you. Barbara stared at the foreclosure notice, the reality of her total ruination finally breaking through her impenetrable wall of narcissism. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking haggard and terrified. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently and completely that she physically could not process it. She had spent my entire life looking down on me, trying to force me into a mold of subservience. Now she was staring at the undeniable proof that the son-in-law she worshipped had destroyed her, and the daughter she despised was her only potential lifeline. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and panicked. "Riley," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The bank. They took it. They really took it." I know I said, my expression unchanging. "I warned you yesterday. You chose to call me a liar." Barbara's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the carpeted floor of the conference room, landing just a few feet away from where Courtney was still curled in a fetal position. But Barbara was not crying for her golden child. She was crying for herself. "Please." Barbara sobbed, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "Please, Riley. You have to help us. We have nowhere to go. We have nothing. You are a CEO. You have millions of dollars. You can fix this. You can call the bank and buy the house back." She reached out her hands, grasping desperately at the hem of my skirt. The sheer audacity of her request was staggering. After threatening to kill herself in my lobby, after accusing me of faking federal crimes, and after standing by while my niece was assaulted, she was actually begging me to open my checkbook and save her from the consequences of her own toxic choices. "You are my daughter," Barbara pleaded, playing the loving mother card with a sickening desperation. "I know we have had our differences. I know I was hard on you, but I only wanted what was best for you. I love you, Riley. Please do not let your father and me sleep on the street. Buy the house back. I am begging you." I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. For 32 years I had craved her approval. I had wanted her to look at me with pride. I had wanted her to love me the way she loved Courtney. But looking at her now sobbing and begging, I felt absolutely no connection to her. The invisible chain that had bound me to her approval had been severed the moment she tore up my MIT letter, and now it was completely pulverized. I stepped back, pulling my skirt out of her desperate grasp. "You do not love me, Mother?" I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. "You love control. And you love the comfort that Jamal's stolen money provided. You only remember you are my mother when you need my money to clean up your mess." "But I am your family," Barbara wailed, clutching her chest. "Family does not tear up a 19-year-old's future," I replied coldly. "Family does not let a teenager go scrub toilets to pay off credit card debt. And family certainly does not let a man hit a child." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I looked at Mitchell, who was standing quietly by the door, and then back down at Barbara. "But you are right about one thing," I said smoothly. "I do have millions of dollars. And I did call the bank." Barbara stopped crying instantly. She looked up, a sudden, desperate spark of hope igniting in her eyes. "You did?" "Yes," I confirmed. "When my fraud software detected Jamal's default on your second mortgage, I contacted the commercial lending division of Chase Bank. I bypassed the standard public auction process entirely." Courtney slowly sat up from the floor, her tear-streaked face turning toward me. "You bought it?" Courtney asked, her voice cracking. "You bought our parents' house." Barbara scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes frantically. "Oh, Riley, thank you. I knew you would not let us down. I knew you would do the right thing. We will pack up Courtney's things, and she can move back in with us. We can start over." She reached out to hug me, completely convinced that her nightmare was over and that she was back in control. I held up my hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "I did buy the house," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "I wired the funds directly to the bank this morning. The deed is officially in my name." Barbara smiled, though it looked strained. "Okay, that is fine. We can pay you rent." "You are not moving back in," I told her. Barbara's face went completely blank. "What do you mean?" "It is our house, Riley. If you own it, then we can just stay. We will pay you back. We will figure it out." I shook my head slowly, looking at her with a profound emptiness. "You still do not understand. I did not buy that house to save you. I bought it to ensure you face the exact consequences of your actions. I reached over and picked up a second much thinner folder from the table. I pulled out a single sheet of paper with a fresh notary stamp at the bottom. I signed this over an hour ago, I explained, holding the document up so she could clearly see the bold heading. This is a deed of gift. I just legally transferred the entire property free and clear to the Safe Haven Women and Children's Shelter. Barbara stared at the paper, as if it were written in a foreign language. A shelter, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, a shelter, I said, my voice rising slightly with righteous anger. A sanctuary for women and teenagers who have been abused. Women who need a safe place to sleep because the men in their lives hit them. Just like your granddaughter. Courtney flinched violently on the floor at the mention of Sydney. I looked directly at my sister, then back to my mother. You allowed a violent con artist into your home. You allowed him to strike a 16-year-old girl. You defended him even after he fled. So now the house you prized above everything else, the house you used to show off your fake perfect family to the neighbors, is going to be used to protect the exact type of victims you created. Barbara stumbled backward, shaking her head frantically. No, you cannot do that. That is my home. All my things are there. My memories are there. You cannot just give it to a bunch of strangers. You have to undo it. It is already done, Mitchell interjected, smoothly snapping his leather briefcase shut. The charity takes full legal possession on Monday morning. The transfer is completely irrevocable. I looked at my watch, then back at my mother. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your things and get out. If you or my father are still on the property by 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the charity director will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Barbara let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She lunged forward, grabbing my arm, her manicured nails digging fiercely into my suit jacket sleeve. You are a monster, she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. You are a cold, heartless monster. I wish you had never been born. I looked down at her hands gripping my arm. I did not pull away immediately. I let her hold on to her rage for one final second. I used to wish the same thing I told her quietly. I used to wish I was never born, just so I would not have to feel the pain of my own mother hating me. But now, I am incredibly glad I am here. Because I am the one who finally stopped you. I forcefully peeled her fingers off my sleeve. She stumbled back, collapsing into a leather chair. You have 48 hours, Barbara, I repeated, turning my back on her entirely. I looked down at Courtney, who was still weeping uncontrollably on the floor. And Courtney, I suggest you start looking for a job immediately. Jamal's accounts are frozen, and your credit cards will be declined by dinner time. Welcome to the real world. I turned to Mitchell. We are done here. We walked out of the conference room together, leaving the heavy wooden door wide open behind us. The sound of Barbara's hysterical sobbing and Courtney's pathetic wailing followed us down the dingy hallway, but I did not look back. Not even once. As we stepped out into the parking lot, the bright afternoon sun hit my face. The storm from yesterday had completely passed. The air smelled like rain and fresh asphalt, clean and entirely unburdened. Mitchell walked beside me. That was the most efficient dismantling of a toxic environment I have ever witnessed, he said, a rare tone of genuine respect in his voice. It was necessary, I replied, unlocking my car with a click. They would have drained me dry and destroyed Sydney in the process. Now they cannot hurt anyone ever again. I got into the driver's seat and closed the door. I took a deep breath, letting the silence wrap around me. For the very first time, my chest did not feel tight. The overwhelming shadow of my family's expectations had been eradicated. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the highway. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, endless paperwork, and absolute vindication. Investigator Dalton kept her word. By Tuesday morning, a family court judge had reviewed the mountain of forensic evidence against Jamal, as well as the photographic proof of physical abuse. Given the massive financial crimes and the imminent threat of violent loan sharks showing up at Courtney's door, the state did not hesitate for a single second. I was officially granted full emergency custody of Sydney. Courtney tried to fight it, of course. She showed up at the courthouse sobbing, playing the role of the victimized mother, but the judge saw right through the dramatic performance. Within a week, the federal government seized absolutely everything Courtney owned. Her leased luxury cars were towed right out of her driveway, and her designer clothes, handbags, and expensive jewelry were auctioned off by the state to pay restitution to Jamal's victims. She was forced to move into a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the other side of town, working double shifts at a local diner just to make rent. Jamal accepted a plea deal to avoid a lengthy, humiliating trial, but federal judges do not show mercy to men who steal life savings from the elderly. He was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He will be an old man by the time he breathes free air again. As for my parents, they learned the hard way that their toxic actions had permanent, devastating consequences. At exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the charity director arrived at their house accompanied by the local sheriff. Barbara and Richard were escorted off the property with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few hastily packed suitcases. They tried to call me, leaving dozens of desperate voicemails begging for forgiveness, but my phone number had already been changed. The last I heard, they were renting a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, relying entirely on my father's meager Social Security checks, because Jamal had completely wiped out their retirement. The house they loved more than their own daughter was transformed into a thriving sanctuary, providing safe beds and hot meals to dozens of women and children escaping abuse. But none of that mattered to me anymore. Their misery was their own doing. My focus was entirely on the future. The transition was not perfectly smooth at first. Sydney had a lot of deep trauma to unpack, and we spent the first few months navigating therapy appointments and long late-night talks in my kitchen. But slowly the fear faded, and the light returned to her eyes. Away from the constant screaming, the manipulation, and the crushing pressure of her mother's vanity, she began to genuinely thrive. She transferred to a top-tier private science academy near my penthouse, throwing herself into her studies with a fierce determination that reminded me so much of myself. 6 months later, I found myself sitting in the plush, oversized leather seat of a first-class cabin on a direct flight to Boston. The soft hum of the jet engines was a soothing background noise as we cruised at 30,000 feet. I looked over at the seat next to me. Sydney was fast asleep, her head resting comfortably against the window. She was wearing a brand new, oversized crimson hoodie with the letters MIT printed boldly in stark white across the chest. We were flying out for her official campus tour. She had not only caught up on all her classes, but she had also joined a competitive robotics team and was already drafting her early admission essays. The $350,000 college fund was sitting safely in a secure trust, completely untouchable by anyone but her, waiting to turn her brightest dreams into reality. I smiled, turning my gaze away from my sleeping niece and looking out the small oval window. The thick layer of white clouds stretched out endlessly beneath us, glowing brightly in the morning sun. For so long I had believed that I was the broken one. I had let my mother's bitter words convince me that I was unlovable, that my success was a flaw, and that independence was a sin. But sitting here now, I realized the absolute truth. I was never the problem. I was the one who broke the generational curse. I had survived the fire, and I had pulled my niece out of the flames before she could burn. We were completely free. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace and the people you love? It is the hardest decision you will ever make, but it is also the most necessary. I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories of resilience and ultimate justice. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that blood does not always mean family. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, your future belongs entirely to you.